I would like to thank Erica Ayala 704 for writing to us. She wants to know how to cook steak. So, first, you need a cast iron. I highly recommend a cast iron. If you don't have one, that's fine, but I highly suggest you do. And also a thermal pan. But the thermal pan, uh, that's not a recommendation, it's a must. And I'll show you why. You want to be accurate, make sure that you know exactly what the temperature is. Is it going down? Is it going up? It's a good indicator and allows you to make decisions at the moment without any of the guesswork. So this is highly recommended and this is a must. Perfect example, when I went to the store today to get these steaks, I noticed they were all thin. Some of them didn't have good marbling. I tried to do my best and I picked the ones with the most marbling, but still the quality wasn't that great. The thickness is not where you need it. So we're gonna adapt them dry and make sure that we season them before we put them to cook. I'm gonna cook two of these steaks traditionally and then one non-traditionally, so you can see the difference and why it's important to have a thermal pan. So just make sure you salt liberally and make sure you use kosher salt. Don't use table salt for this. Make sure you season both sides. If you don't have kosher salt and you're not used to it, I suggest you start trying it out. It's less salty. To a very hot pan, we're gonna add fat. I recommend beef tallow. I have beef tallow, so I use pork lard, and I'm trying to sear the fat so I can render some of the fat out to kind of add to the pan. And I noticed how thin they are, and I realized like let me try to add the second steak just to see if that would be the correct thickness. So I'm adding the second steak, and as you can see, that's thicker. That ideally would be the thickness that you want your steaks to be. However, the store or the supermarket I went to didn't have them that thick. There's no butcher on site, so unfortunately, that's what we got. And this is a problem that many people face. So once we got a nice crust, a nice sear on that, we're gonna go ahead and just go ahead and lay them down flat. Make sure they're nice and flat, touching the cast iron all the way. You don't want them to steam at the bottom. That causes the gray color. As you can see here, it was steaming a little bit, but we can correct that. So you want to be checking for a nice crust formation. If you need to put a little bit more fat to aid in that, that's fine. And as you can see, this is the crust we're looking for. But when I flipped them, I realized like, wow, like this is pretty thin. So it might be time to start basting the steaks, because otherwise they're going to be on the fire for too long. They're going to get really dry and overcook if they're not so already. I'm doing this by feel, and because of the thickness of this, doesn't feel right anymore. So I went ahead and added 2 knobs of butter and some rosemary, and we're gonna start basting the steaks. So what I do is I tilt the pan slightly so that all the fat pools down at the bottom, and then I'm able to spoon that fat, that flavored fat, onto the top of the steaks. Then we flip them, do the same thing. So tilt the pan, make sure that fat starts running down, and with the sizable spoon, you might want to start basting them like so. And then we're gonna make sure that everything's covered. Make sure that that rosemary is on there, and then I went ahead and rested them. They're gonna rest for half the amount that you cooked them for. So while they're resting, we're gonna go ahead and make a pan sauce with all those bits and pieces that were left on the pan. I went ahead and chopped some mushrooms. If you don't like mushrooms, you could just do onion and garlic. But to this, I added shallots and garlic. If you don't have any shallots available to you, you can just use white onion or red onion. Make sure it's finely diced and make sure it doesn't burn. So once they become translucent, that's when we take the next step. So we're going to move them around, make sure they're nicely cooked. I added white wine because I was out of red wine, but ideally for beef, you can use red wine. If you're in a pinch and you don't have red wine and you have white wine like I did, that's fine. It's still going to be flavorful. Make sure that cooks down, and it actually reduced all the way almost. They call it au sec, to reduce au sec. It's a French term. It's like going to be like practically dry, almost dry. And then when that happens, you're going to add a little bit more butter to emulsify everything. And what you want to do while you're doing this is also bring down the fire. And the cold butter combining with the hot mixture that we have here will emulsify and thicken the sauce a little bit. and that's going to be going on top of your steak. So when you're ready to plate, this is the sauce that you're going to go ahead and plate. So speaking about plating, let's go check on those steaks. Now, I can already tell you that that steak is dry, but it's not you. It's the steak. It's the thickness of the steak. It's not helping. You can't properly cook a steak without any hacks or, weird kitchen tips or, kitchen hacks or whatever. As you can see, that's dry. So we're going to make some sacrifices. So on a really hot cast iron, we're going to put some more fat. And we might skip a couple steps. So if you're in a pinch, this is the perfect problem-solving video for you. All of a sudden, you gotta make a steak. The thickness is not on your side, so now you know what to do. And so what we're doing is we're laying the steak away from us so it doesn't splatter onto us. And we're still gonna make sure that it's nice and flat on the cast iron. We're gonna try to get as much crust as quickly as possible without it overcooking. So that's gonna be a doozy. So now we check the crust and we've realized that it's not where it needs to be, but as you can see, it's cooked almost all the way to the halfway point, and that's a sign that we gotta flip. So unfortunately, we're gonna have to flip, and as you can see, there's some areas that it's kind of gray. It's not the best crust, but it's not the worst. I've seen worse or no crust at all. But anyways, so now we're gonna thermal pan the steak, and it's at 134 and falling, so we're in the neighborhood already. Unfortunately, the bottom didn't get a full sear. Now, you want a steak that's pretty thick. This steak was 0.75 or 3/4 of an inch. Ideally, for our purposes, that's not the right steak. You want a steak that's double that, so 1.5 inches or more. It's up to you after that point. And so if your grocery store, your supermarket has a butcher on site, you can request for 1.5 inches of whatever steak you want. If there's no butcher on site, a carniceria would probably be your best bet. Make sure they have the cut that you want and you specify the thickness. I will go that route. So this problem, I'm sure many people are facing in their local supermarket. So they end up with a dry steak. And so the reason is that it's not you, it's the steak. So now let's check on that steak that we rested. We're going to take some of that fat off so we can get a clean cut here. And as you can see, there's already pink on there. If you want it a little bit longer, I pulled it out at about 134. You might want to go to 140, maybe even up to 145, depending on where you want it, how well you want it. But the more the temperature rises, the less juice there's going to be there. So cut the steak, and then we're going to check the middle so you can see that it's still juicy, still shiny, nice and pink, not bloody. Perfect steak, if you ask me. If you want a little bit more done, then just wait a couple minutes, maybe a minute, and then you check it with the thermal pan. So that steak, we're going to go ahead and plate it, put it in the center of the plate, and then to show off that, you had a good cook on the steak, you're going to try to fan out the steak a little bit so that your guest or your loved ones can see that. And then, do you remember that pan sauce we did? So we're going to go ahead and use that just to help the steak a little bit more. It doesn't need it. The other steaks needed it big time, but this one doesn't really need it. If you want to add pepper at this point or some flaky finishing salt as well, that works right now. This would be the time. So make sure all that sauce is on top of that steak. If you look at the colors, it's dark browns, so it's pretty much all the same. So we're going to add a little bit of brightness, both visually and in terms of flavor. And there you have it. A nice, perfectly cooked steak. We made some sacrifices. We adjusted, we pivoted because the steak wasn't on our side. Nonetheless, we problem solved and we got this done. So now you know how to do a steak. So peace.